My name's David Whelan. I'm Paul Whelan's twin brother. I think the call was important for Paul. It is an incredible thing. You're not really the same person you were when it started. And so I don't really know Paul now because he's a very different person from who he was. I have been amazed, impressed. I don't know what the right word is. His ability to stay focused, stay upbeat on calls with our parents. It's remarkable, really, that he continues to be able to do that.
David, yesterday we got word that Secretary of State Antony Blinken had made a phone call to Paul. And I'd like to know what your family thought regarding that call. What do you feel or make of the call?
I think the call was important for Paul. It is an incredible thing. We have been very lucky, I think, to have people in the United States government who are willing to uh, interact with Paul, interact with our family, even though they're at the highest levels of the government. So for Paul to get a call from the Secretary of State was really important for him, I think. If nothing else, he feels like he's speaking to the people who are making the decisions about whether he will be released or not. And so hopefully that's helped his morale.
One of the things I heard you mention in a televised interview yesterday was that this really does not signal anything to suggest that this is going to end his incarceration anytime soon. You said, I think he could still end up being in prison until 2034 or something like that. Would you care to expound on that a little bit?
That's right. His original sentence was for 16 years, and it'll be up in January of 2034, I believe. I think I've got my numbers right. And I think we're getting to the point in Paul's situation that we've seen with cases like Mark Swiden in China, Kylie in China, even the cases that we are hoping to see resolved in Iran, where it's been so many years that it's not clear that the U.S. government is going to be able to come up with a concession in order to bring Paul home. And so I think that at least my recommendation to our parents when I saw them recently was we can always hope that there's going to be a resolution sooner, but really we're in here for the long haul. We need to be prepared to support Paul until 2034 and also be prepared that he may not come home until then.
There was a time in 2022, David, that the State Department talked about this, quote, substantial proposal that they had made. And I noted that you mentioned in a message that you sent out to us who continue to follow your case or Paul's case, that that messaging has dropped from State Department, I guess, communications. What do you think the reasoning is for that?
Well, I think that they were trailing a possible concession to the Kremlin, and they trailed it along for a long time without getting a bite. And at some point, you fish or you cut bait, and I think that they've cut bait on that proposal. It's not to say that the Kremlin might change its mind in the future, but I think it's no longer. I think that the people inside the U.S. government have realized there's a very small likelihood of whatever that was ever being taken up by the Kremlin.
And you mentioned as well that maybe some of these, quote, I think you mentioned difficult decisions that might need to be made have not been made. What were you alluding to there?
Well, I'm not really aware of what the U.S. government is looking at as far as concessions, but we know that when Trevor Reed was released and when Brittany Griner were released, they were released in exchange for Russian prisoners in the federal prison system. And in both cases, the White House said that the president had made difficult decisions in order for those exchanges to happen. And I think that the concern that we always have is that one stone hasn't been unturned, one decision hasn't been made, that the president hasn't either been given information that he might decide to make in order to make a concession, or that other people in the government are trying to find other ways, easier ways to bring Paul home. And so it's a constant frustration, particularly now that Paul has been left behind twice, that there may be concessions that could be made that we're not aware of, but that also no one is willing to sort of go to that step, whatever that step would be.
So, on a day-to-day basis, just give me a sense, if you can, of how Paul's incarceration impacts your family. I know you mentioned quite frequently your parents speak to him, I think more than anybody else. Can you give us a sense of just how this whole thing, since 2018 now, has impacted your family and certainly your parents and yourself, being Paul's twin brother?
It it's been difficult. There's no way to put it any other way. I think we have been fortunate. The prison rules only allow Paul to speak to his parents or people he's married to or children or so on. So he's really only been able to speak to our parents over the last 3, 4 years, where he's been allowed phone calls at all. And even those aren't consistent. So I mean, it's difficult. You can imagine as a parent wanting to know how your child is, but also you get 15 minutes a day if the call happens, and some of that time may be, information that you need to pass on from the State Department or information you need to pass back to the State Department from Paul. And so it's got to be very draining. And then of course there's this whole experience. I was speaking to them recently about this, um, about people who are well-meaning, but when you go out in public or you're at a social event or whatever, they want to know what's going on with Paul's case because maybe they haven't seen it in the media or whatever. And really there's nothing going on. It's very difficult to have those conversations over and over again. It makes you not want to be social, not want to get out, and then you are further isolated within the sort of the confines of the case. So I think it can be very difficult. Of course, all of that's in perspective with Paul's situation. They have fewer textiles to work on, so they are sitting in the factory all day. They're not allowed to do anything else. They're not allowed to read a book at the desk. They have to sit at their sewing machines and just sit for their 8-hour period or whatever it is. And the food has gotten smaller portions. We worry about his health from that perspective, but there's a sort of stability that has happened where it's this ongoing boredom, ongoing sort of low-level deterioration of his life, and so that's the real concern, is that the longer that the U.S. government takes, it's not that they won't be able to figure it out sometime, but through that entire time, there's a corrosive effect on our parents and our family. There's a corrosive effect on Paul, who's sitting in these awful conditions, waiting for something to happen.
So you have looked at this from so many different perspectives over the time that I've known you, since 2018, from a relative of Paul, from the State Department's approach, from the Russians' approach, from the diplomats from other countries. So who knows how many other things that you lay awake at night thinking about in other perspectives. But at the end of the day, the one that really matters most is Paul's, to me. And I get that from you and talking to your sister Elizabeth every day, or whenever we speak, I should say. So can you give me a sense of Paul? Um, you know, you just mentioned his, life and health may be deteriorating and most likely are, but knowing what you know about Paul, can you give us a sense of where you think Paul is right now in his own head? As close as possible. I know you can't do that, but
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer, and I'm not sure anymore, because I think that this is something that happens to all members of families involved in this, is that you're not really the same person you were when it started. And so I don't really know Paul now, because he's a very different person from who he was. And I think I have been amazed, impressed, I don't know what the right word is, his ability to stay focused, stay upbeat on calls with our parents. Not always, I mean, as you can expect, but to really continue to fight against the ongoing injustices. I mean, even when he's in prison, I won't get into the details, but there are occasions when he's not treated well by the guards or by other people, and he doesn't take any guff when that comes up. He's able to, still revert to having conversations about Flora the dog, who unfortunately has recently died, but, family related sort of activities, things that are going on in the village where my parents are. So he has been able to connect himself to his old life, to the things that he remembers, to the experiences that keep him alive outside of Mordovia. And I think it's remarkable, really, that he continues to be able to do that. And again, I hope he can do it till 2034. That's what we need to help him to get to. But he has done a remarkable job so far of staying connected and really just keeping a level head about the awful situation he's in.
I'll say this. Here's hoping that it does not take that long. It's taken longer than it should. One day was too long, but let's hope that it doesn't take longer. And I want to thank you again for taking time to chat. I appreciate you.
Oh, glad to do it, JJ. It's always good to talk to you.